I'm sure that all of us, at one time or another, sit down. I'm sure that all of us, at one time or another, has heard the old phrase, or perhaps we have even shared this phrase with somebody, but I'm sure we have all heard the old phrase, count your blessings, right? Sometimes when we run across somebody that seems a little down and we try to pick them up, we'll tell them, just count your blessings. And so we have all heard that phrase and even used that phrase. But where did that phrase come from? Anybody know?
My grandmother.
Okay. Well, where did Janet's grandmother get it? Where did that phrase come from? Well, believe it or not, and I'm not surprised that you don't really have the answer, but believe it or not, there are many who credit the beginning of that phrase to a hymn that was written back in 1897, 122 years ago. Now, that's kind of a little hint. What hymn could that phrase possibly have come from? Okay, count your blessings. Sometimes we know that particular hymn as When Upon Life's Billows, and it's in page 742 of our book. Page 742. This particular hymn, as we said, was written back in 1897, so 122 years ago. And even today, it is still a very popular hymn. It is a favorite hymn in our hymnals. You know, there's hardly a Sunday that doesn't go by in which this hymn isn't being led somewhere. When upon life's billows you, or count your blessings. Now, when you look at that particular hymn here in our book, and by the way, one verse is missing from our books, and really it is probably a verse that really needs to be in our particular book. But when you look at this particular hymn, I want to ask the question, what is being taught in this hymn?
When you feel like all is lost,
Okay.
stop and think about what God has blessed you with.
Oh, okay. When all is lost, we need to stop and think about what God has blessed us with. Anybody know what is meant here? I'm asking this question because I would like to know. But does anybody know what is meant here by life's billows? Anybody know? Here's all that I can find out. A billow is a cloud of smoke that rises up into the air. That's the only definition that I can find. So what is life's billow? Well,
I always thought of it as a storm.
as a storm, okay, well, as a storm. Well, it's life's storm or life's smoke that rises up into the air. But what is meant here by tempest tossed? What do you think is meant by that? It is, by the way, the dictionary.
I always think the sea.
Okay.
Off the waves.
Okay, being tossed, the waves coming back and forward and being tossed by the waves. How do we apply that to our life?
Or like sheets or something.
Back and forth.
Okay, back and forth in what way?
The world and where we have a lot of faith, the world and that's the faith.
Okay. You look that up in the dictionary, and like I said, tempest tossed does appear in the dictionary. Tempest tossed carries with it the idea of to be pounded or hit repeatedly by storms or by adversities. Okay? All right, so that's something, Steve, you can understand, right?
Definitely.
Just the constant being hit by the adversities of this life.
I wonder if these billows could refer to
like James says, life is just a vapor, appears for a little bit.
That appears for a little time. And so, in this life, and this is what I believe what is being said here. I believe that what is being said here is that in this life, we are going to have adversities that are going to come. They're going to come and they're going to go. We're going to be pounded throughout this life by adversities, by troubles, by temptation, by so many different things. So what is being taught here? Well, let's begin first of all by talking about what is not being taught. What's not being taught? What do you think is not being taught here? Anybody?
Life's not an easy ride.
Okay, life is not an easy ride. That's what is being taught. But what is not being taught here?
Everything is calm.
Huh?
Everything is calm.
Okay, we're not being taught here that everything is calm. And we're not being taught here that we should just ignore the adversities in our life. You ever have anybody tell you that? Well, just ignore them. Just pretend they're not there. And they'll go away, right? Okay, now, Stephen, let me ask you. Does it ever go away just by ignoring it? No. None of these things ever go away just by ignoring them. And this hymn is not teaching us to just ignore the adversities of life, the troubles of life. But what is it teaching us? Well, it is teaching us two things here. First of all, it is teaching us we are going to have adversities. And when we have adversities, how should we deal with them? How should we deal with them? How should we deal with them?
Pray for guidance.
Okay, we need to pray for guidance. Okay, did you get that little hint? What should we do? We need to talk to who about them? God. We need to talk to God about them. Notice the little hints here throughout this hymn. The little hints. Verse 2 down in the second stanza. Do not be dismayed, or do not be discouraged, I'm sorry. God is what? God is over all. And so don't be discouraged by the problems that are in your life. Talk to God about them, because God is over all things. Okay. Look at the third verse, very last stanza down on the page there. Help and comfort give you to your journey's end. What's that telling us?
That we're not alone, that He is with us always.
Okay, we're not alone. He is with us. And if we simply go to Him with the problems we have in this life, we're going to have help and comfort. It's to be found with God. And He will help us and He will comfort us. What's the second lesson that's being taught here? We said there's actually two lessons being taught in this hymn. The second lesson is to appreciate something.
What He's already blessed us with.
To appreciate what He has already blessed us with. Now, how has God blessed us?
Look at what we have.
Okay.
Look at what He allows us to have.
Okay.
We all are well fed. Just look around. We all have a place to live. We have clothes to wear. We have vehicles.
Why did you come up with that? We're all well fed. You're looking at me, and you say we're all well fed.
Well, sorry. Everybody but Tom is well fed.
Okay, everybody but Tom is well fed. Okay, well.
But he just gives us everything.
Okay, He gives us everything.
And we don't, I never used to think about that. I thought, I did this for me. I worked hard for this. I paid for this. I worked for this. But I wouldn't have anything if He hadn't allowed me to do that.
Okay, you paid for everything. Who gave you the job?
Exactly.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And so God has given us everything. Turn to Ephesians chapter 1. Ephesians chapter 1 and verse 3. You want me to read that for you? All right. Ephesians chapter 1 verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, who has blessed us with what?
All things.
All. Okay, not, He's blessed us with all things, but in particular, Paul tells us He has blessed us with all what?
Spiritual blessings.
Spiritual blessings. Okay? All means what? All of them. So do we have several spiritual blessings?
Right, yes.
Oh, okay. What do you consider to be a spiritual blessing?
Something spiritual.
What is a spiritual blessing? Just name one.
Answered prayer.
Answered prayer. Is that a blessing? Certainly is. Time and time again. Brenda?
Answered prayers.
Okay, sometimes unanswered prayers is also a spiritual blessing because God is telling us something there. What is another spiritual blessing? Peace of mind is a spiritual blessing.
I think that's one of the biggest ones.
Okay. What's another spiritual blessing? Hope is a spiritual blessing. How about forgiveness? Is forgiveness a spiritual blessing? So God has blessed us in several different ways. We can sit down and we can make a whole list of things that God has blessed us with spiritually.
Yeah, John 9:31 says God doesn't hear sinners. So if anyone in Christ, God will listen to us.
Okay, He'll listen to us and He'll answer that. You know, we talked a little bit about that this morning. We have example after example of which God answered our prayers. And so we are spiritually blessed. Now, do you think if we spend all of our time being thankful for the things that God has given us, will that lift us above the adversities? Without a doubt. It'll help us to deal with the problems that are in our life and lift us above those problems.
We're still gonna have them.
Huh?
We're still gonna have them.
We're still going to have them.
They'll just be easier to deal with.
They'll be easier to deal with because we have turned them over to God and we have stopped and we have considered the blessings that God has given us. So, go ahead.
What the song is saying, the well turn of God and count your
Okay. Turn them over to God and count your blessings. That will help us to overcome these problems. And so it is a song of thanksgiving. And it is a song that helps us to deal with the problems that are in our life.
Sometimes we're too impatient.
Sometimes we're too impatient.
Like Abraham promised to father of all nations, 100 got no kids.
Okay, okay. But he didn't let that work on his faith, did he? He continued to believe it's going to happen in God's way, in God's time. Okay. So that is the lesson of this particular hymn. All right, now let's dig a little bit deeper into the history of this hymn. It was written, as we said, in 1897. And so it's 122 years old. And it quickly became a very popular hymn. One author that I read had this to say about the hymn, Count Your Many Blessings. And I'm just going to refer to it as that, okay? I can get all mixed up on these two different titles, so let's just stick with one. Count Your Many Blessings. One writer that I read said this: the song Count Your Many Blessings is like a beam of sunlight that brightens up the dark places of the earth. And isn't that true? If we are concentrating upon the things that God has done for us, it brightens our world. This hymn was written, if you look down on the bottom of the page, was written by Johnson Oatman Jr. Johnson Oatman is an American, or was an American. He was born in America. The song was written in America. But it came out in Great Britain as well in that same year, and it became a very popular hymn. So popular that there was a crusade going on in that same year of 1897. There was a crusade that was going on in Wales, and this song became so popular that it was led every night of that crusade. History tells us that in Great Britain, it became so popular that all the men sung it, all the boys whistled it, and all the women rocked their babies to sleep by this hymn. That's how popular it became. Johnson Oatman, Jr., was born April the 21st, 1956, or 1856, excuse me, just a very short time before the Civil War. He was born to Johnson Sr. and Rachel Oatman. Now, Johnson Sr., he was a merchant. He worked in mercantile. Now, mercantile is the selling and the buying of material goods. And so he was a merchant throughout all his life. But he was also known as the greatest singer in town. The greatest singer in town. He had a very beautiful voice, a very powerful voice. In fact, there were some who said he was the greatest singer on the eastern seaboard of the United States. I don't know. But he was believed to be the best singer in town. Johnson Jr. wanted to be like his dad in every way. Whatever his dad did, he wanted to follow in his dad's footsteps. And one of the things that he wanted to do was to be a great musician. He wanted to be a great singer. But, unlike Joe, he didn't have a beautiful voice. He didn't have the talent of his father. And so he would not become a great singer. But he did sing along with his father. As a child, he come to know so many church hymns because his father would sing throughout the day, and he would sing along with his father. But he wanted and had a desire to preach the gospel. Now, he would go into business with his father. He would become a merchant just like his father, into mercantile. And he would work as a merchant in the family business, Johnson Oatman and Son, his entire life. That would be his business. Now, he did spend a little bit of time as a administrator in a big insurance company, but he remained in mercantile all his life. But he always had this desire to preach the gospel. So at the age of 19, he began to be a gospel preacher. But he come to realize something. He come to realize that it wasn't for him. In fact, he come to realize that he wasn't much better a gospel preacher as he was a singer. He realized he wasn't going to become a great gospel preacher, and so he never once worked full-time for a congregation. He would simply do fill-in work whenever it was needed. But he worked as a merchant. He worked in mercantile, and that he made a good living from that. But he always felt that he wanted to preach the gospel. So at the age of 32, he came to the realization, you know what, maybe I can do this a different way. Because at the age of 32, he realized that even though he didn't have the ability to be a beautiful singer, he did have the ability and the talent to write hymns. And he said, there is how I can preach the gospel. Now stop and think for a minute. Stop and think for a minute. Joe, how many hymns do you think you could write in a year? Not very many? Dave, how many do you think you could write in a year?
0.
Okay, 0. A lot of us would be about like Dave. But you know what? I believe that, like Joe, if I sit down and I really put my mind to it, I think that I could write a hymn in a year. Maybe 1 or maybe 2. Guess how many hymns Johnson Jr. would write every year? Anybody want to guess?
20.
Huh?
365.
365? You're a lot closer than Dave. Okay.
I'd say hundreds.
Okay, he wrote hundreds. In fact, he averaged the writing of 200 hymns every year the rest of his life. By the end of his life, how many hymns do you want to guess that he had written? It wasn't as many as Annie Crosby. Right. Fanny Crosby. Fanny Crosby wrote, what was it, 8,000 hymns in her life, something of that.
I'm gonna guess and say 5,000.
Steve, you got it exactly. He wrote 5,000 hymns in his life, many of which we sing today. Higher Ground, which is in our book. I'm pressing on the upward way. New heights I'm gaining every day. Johnson Jr. wrote that hymn. He also wrote the hymn, No Not One. Oh, there's not a friend like the lowly Jesus. No, not one. No, not one. Johnson Jr. also wrote that hymn. By the way, Higher Ground and No, Not One were his two favorite hymns out of those 5,000 that he had wrote. This particular hymn wasn't one of his favorites, but it went on to become perhaps one of the most famous of all of his hymns. And it is certainly a favorite of many people today. Let's sing this hymn together, shall we? 742. 742. Let's sing this hymn together. When upon life's billows you are tempest tossed, when you are discouraged thinking all is lost, count your many blessings, name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. Are you ever burdened with a load of care? Does the cross seem heavy you are called to bear? Count your many blessings, every doubt will fly. You can sing heaven as the days go by. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. So amid the conflict, whether great or small, do not be discouraged, God is over all. Count your many blessings, angels will attend. Help and comfort give you to your journey's end. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your blessings, see what God hath done. Count your blessings, name them one by one. Count your many blessings, see what God hath done. Johnson Oatman died in Inman, Oklahoma in 1922. He died in the home of his daughter, who would become a hymn writer herself and would write many hymns throughout her life. His great-grandson is also a hymn writer till this very day. We want to extend the invitation. If we have anyone here this evening who needs to come and to make things right with the Father, why not come right now while together we stand and we sing.